When I talk about the mainstream media, we're talking here about the big networks, the big cable networks, the big major newspapers, the major magazines, maybe major websites as well. You know, I often use the word bubble because I'm very sensitive to the fact that I live in Washington, grew up in New York. You can throw LA into the mix, but the folks who sort of are the most prominent voices in the mainstream media and who own the mainstream media and who manage and make story selections for mainstream media outlets basically live in these big cities and may not often be in touch what's happening in Tuscaloosa and Tallahassee and Omaha and Albuquerque and the rest of what we like to jokingly call the real America. Well, it prompted an interesting email in the context of our campaign coverage from Pete in Florida, Florida not being one of those states. Mr. Howie, I am an independent, enjoy your show, in that you at least appear to be one of the more reasonable Democratic commentators. One problem with the press is that all of you in Washington and New York know each other or know of each other, and it appears that you as a group have problems criticizing one another. To say that Trump is not being treated differently than Ms. Clinton is apparent to most who live where trees and grass still grow. Mr. Cooper, Anderson Cooper's grilling of Trump with regard to sexual matters appears that he was aware of what the Democrats plan to release. Did this ever cross your mind? Well, first of all, Pete, I'm not a Democratic commentator or a Republican commentator or a liberal commentator or conservative commentator. I am a journalist, a lifelong reporter, and now a media analyst. Secondly, yeah, you have a point about Washington and New York, and it's a point that I bring up from time to time because I do think there tends to be a rather insular nature to the mainstream media and the press corps, particularly in this age of Twitter when everybody sees what everybody else writes and a certain groupthink can set in. Now, as far as Anderson Cooper, Anderson Cooper in that second debate in St. Louis, you know, was dealing with the Access Hollywood tape, where in what Trump now calls locker room talk, he says, you know, I grope women in their private parts. You can do this because you're a celebrity. I mean, he engaged in certain boats. And of course, he now says, and so it was an obvious question, a logical question for Cooper to say, well, did you ever actually do any of these things? And Trump said no. And that could be argued that that opened the door to some of these women coming forward because they wanted to show, in their view, and these are just allegations, that he actually acted on that kind of language with them as they recounted sometimes many, many years ago. I don't think Anderson Cooper had any way of knowing that that these women were going to come forward. Indeed, a number of them, in comments to the New York Times, Washington Post, and elsewhere, say it wasn't until the second debate that they decided to come forward, so there's no way that Cooper could have known that in advance. But on your point about you know, being an independent and feeling like the media don't reflect your views, well, it's a problem. It's a problem not just in terms of this presidential campaign. It's a problem when we talk about the economy, when journalists maybe have a certain amount of job security, not as much as in the past, compared to people in factories who may worry about trade deals or those who are in the service industries. It's a problem on cultural stuff, where there is a mindset in the media, whether the topic is abortion or gay rights or other things that are sort of the hot button social issues, when the view in the mainstream media may be very different than the view in much of America, and too often people in my profession assume that everybody thinks like us. And I always try to keep in mind that that's not the case, that this is a big country, that there are a lot of views. That the reason the country is sort of divided down the middle, and right now, you know, a big chunk of the country supporting Trump, another a chunk of the country supporting Hillary Clinton. So thanks for the email, and we should all remember that life in the Beltway or in Manhattan or in Malibu or Santa Monica is not the way it's lived in the rest of America.